Law schools are lying to you about jobs, and the people who are supposed to stop them just gave them permission. I've got it all in writing. Last fall, the American Bar Association sent law schools an email. The American Bar Association is the organization that decides which law schools count and which don't. Now, the email had three changes to how law schools have to report jobs, and I'm going to read you the one that matters. But first, you've got to have one piece of background. For more than 10 years, every law school's employment report had a separate line called law school funded. That line told you how many of a school's reported jobs were jobs the school itself paid for, including post-grad fellowships, research gigs, made-up positions where the school cuts a check to its own graduates for a few months so they've got somewhere to land. And that number matters. It's the most important warning sign on the report. If a school has to fund its own graduates' jobs, that means the graduates couldn't get hired anywhere else. And last fall, that line got deleted from the report. Here's what the ABA actually wrote word for word. Quote, "Positions that are school funded will now be included in the first table according to whether they are bar admission required, JD Advantage, professional position, or other position. Law schools will now be able to count these positions as such in any employment statistics they wish to publicize." I thought I was misreading it at first, but it actually says law schools will now be able to count those positions as such in any employment statistics they wish to publicize. So that is the American Bar Association in writing telling law schools they are now allowed to hide their fake jobs inside their headline employment number. So imagine, for example, if the SEC were to send an email to public companies saying they could now count internal money transfers as revenue if they feel like it. Shady accounting. Now go look at the headline number every law school is using to recruit you right now. 82.5% employment in aggregate, the highest number in 14 years. But that number now includes school-funded jobs in the headline. Last year's 81% figure did not, the 2018 number didn't either, and none of the numbers below it did either. So this is one row that got measured differently than every row above it. I call this footnote laundering. You take a number that used to live in a footnote with an asterisk next to it, you erase the asterisk, and you roll the number into the headline. You've now got a cleaner story you can show with the same data. You've laundered the footnote. So the data does still exist in the report, technically, if you know which chart on which page in the appendix to flip to. But for 99% of applicants who read the headline rate, the asterisk is effectively gone. And the thing being laundered here is the worst possible thing to launder. School-funded jobs are not real jobs. They are jobs the school made up because the grads could not get hired in the real market. A school that has to fund its own graduates is a school whose graduates are losing. And of every footnote the ABA could have erased, they picked the one that mattered most. And here is what this does in plain terms. Last year, a school that paid its own graduates to look employed had to admit it on the report. The fake jobs got their own line. You could spot them, you could subtract them, and that would let you rank schools honestly. But this year, those same fake jobs are sitting inside the lawyer job column. A school that placed 6% of its graduates in fake school-funded jobs now looks 6 points better on paper than it did last year. Same deal with that 82.5% national employment rate everyone's been celebrating the past few weeks. We don't know how much of that year-over-year jump is real placement versus laundered school-funded jobs. We're not going to know for a while. And the professor who broke this story, Professor Derek Miller, flagged it himself the next morning, posted a follow-up. The title of his blog post was "New ABA Employment Disclosure Protocols Obscure Law School-Funded Job Positions." He used the word obscure, and he's been writing about this for 10 plus years. He's saying the headline number cannot be compared to last year's number unless you do the extra math the report doesn't help you do. And how many applicants are really going to do that math? You're probably not. The 36,000 24-year-olds applying this cycle probably won't either. Now, the ABA didn't just wake up one morning and decide to delete the category. They changed the rule because US News changed the rankings formula first. It's a bit circuitous, but stick with me here on this. For years, US News treated school-funded jobs as being worth less in the rankings. They got half credit. And so a school placing 10% of its class in school-funded fellowships got a smaller rankings boost than a school placing 10% in real lawyer jobs, which is correct because those two things are not the same thing. But a few months ago, US News changed the formula, and now they give school-funded jobs full credit, treated identically to a graduate hired at a top firm. Once that happened, the ABA separate category became inconvenient. If US News was now counting these jobs as full-weight employment, why was the ABA still flagging them as being different? The disclosure rules and the rankings were saying contradictory things, and so the ABA caved. Unbelievably, they caved. They aligned their disclosure rules with the rankings. So the ABA didn't change the rule because applicants asked or because law schools asked. They changed it because US News changed its formula. The body that is supposed to protect applicants from getting lied to fell in line with the magazine that ranks law schools. So the regulator following the rankings, which is the opposite of how it's supposed to work. And Professor Derek Mueller put it politely. He said, quote, "Now that those school-funded jobs have full weight in US News, perhaps the motivation for keeping them as a separate top-line category has decreased." And so that is a polite way of saying, we used to disclose this because it mattered, then US News stopped caring, so we stopped caring. So imagine it's May 2030, you're at your 5-year college reunion, you graduated law school 2 weeks ago, and somebody you haven't seen since college walks up to you and says, "Hey, you went to law school, right? You a lawyer now?" And you hesitate because you graduated 2 weeks ago, you're $185,000 in debt, you're going to start a 10-month fellowship your school created because you couldn't get a real lawyer job, and the fellowship pays $42,000. The guy who walked up to you went to a 6-month coding boot camp 4 years ago, works at a tech company now, makes $145,000 a year with zero debt. Now, you can't really call yourself a lawyer the way the question was being asked you because you haven't represented a client, you haven't been to court. You're just filling a slot the school invented to keep its employment numbers high. And next year, your school is going to report you as one of the 81% of graduates who got a lawyer job. And next year, some 24-year-old applying to that same law school is going to trust that 81% figure. Now, you got to know that every law school's headline employment number is a sales document. The schools now have permission to inflate it, and you can bet they will. What you got to do is pull up the 509 report. That is the disclosure form every law school has to publish. You find the school-funded jobs number deeper in the report and subtract it from the headline number. That is your real number, the only one worth comparing across law schools. So remember that what footnote laundering does is move risks off the school and onto you. Before the rule change, schools that funded their own graduates' jobs had to flag it where everybody could see it. But now after the rule change, schools with the worst placement now get the cleanest looking numbers. They can roll the jobs into the lawyer column, even though the school's the one funding those jobs. The whole thing has been flipped around.